Part 140. The Final Emigrant. The Muslims embarked, and as they passed by the valley of Juhfa, less than a quarter of the way, they encountered the uncle of the Prophet, Al-Abbas ibn Abdul-Muttalib. He was completely unaware of the expedition, and was emigrating to Medina as a Muslim. Allah honored him as the last human being to be counted amongst the emigrants. As the Prophet said, there is no emigration after the conquest. The Prophet rejoiced immensely, then instructed Al-Abbas to take his family to Medina and join the army. There are various opinions as to when exactly Al-Abbas accepted Islam. Ibn Abdul-Barr argues that he accepted Islam just before Hayber. Ibn Hajar believes that he accepted Islam at this point, that is, just before the conquest. And Ibn Kathir maintains that he was living in Mecca as a Muslim, but concealed his faith outwardly at the behest of the Prophet. The evidence is not entirely clear, but it can be definitively said that his heart softened towards Islam at the Battle of Badr, though the exact time of conversion may be ambiguous. The companions respected Al-Abbas immensely and held him in the highest regard, as did the Prophet. When someone irritated Al-Abbas, the Prophet gave an entire sermon, "O people, do not irritate my uncle. For indeed the uncle of a man is like his father." Whenever senior companions such as Umar and Uthman encountered Al-Abbas, they would dismount and greet him. When the Muslims suffered in the year of the drought in 18 after Hijri, Umar gathered all the companions to pray for rain, including early Muslims and attendees of Badr, then chose Al-Abbas to make dua on everyone's behalf. As the Muslim army neared Mecca, rumors began to spread that the Prophet was coming. Two of the Prophet's cousins, and staunch adversaries in Mecca, panicked and waited for the Prophet on the outskirts of Mecca before he entered the city. His paternal cousin, Abu Sufyan, ibn al-Harith, ibn Abdul-Muttalib, not to be confused with the famous Abu Sufyan ibn Harb ibn Umayyah, the leader of the Quraysh, who will accept Islam after the conquest, and his maternal cousin, Abdullah, ibn Abi Umayyah, ibn al-Mughira, intercepted the Prophet before the army entered Mecca, pleading for mercy. Both of them were of the most brazen mockers of Islam in Mecca. Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith wrote the most scathing poems against the Prophet, and Abdullah ibn Abi Umayyah would challenge the Prophet publicly, so much so that Allah quoted him directly.
They challenged the Prophet, "We will never believe in you until you ascend into heaven, and even then we will not believe in your ascension until you bring down a book that we can read." Surah 17, verses 90 to 93.
Abdullah ibn Abi Umayyah was also the half-brother of Mother of the Believers, Salama. He begged her to intercede to the Prophet on their behalf, and she felt pity on her brother. She approached the Prophet and asked,
"O Messenger of Allah, your cousins are here. Do you need anything from them?"
In other words, can you help them? The Prophet replied, "I have no need for either of them." They mocked and abused the Prophet for an entire decade in Mecca, and the pain was all the more potent as they were his own cousins with whom he was raised. While the Prophet was known for his mercy and compassion, those who crossed the line must bear the consequences. Moreover, the Prophet's rejection would be a test for them. Was their request sincere, or would they reply arrogantly? When Salama returned with bad news, Abu Sufyan began begging the Prophet from afar, raising his voice. He raised his son's hand, the Prophet's nephew, and pleaded,
"O Messenger of Allah, I swear by Allah that if you do not let us in, my son and I will traverse the desert alone and die a miserable death."
The Prophet's heart, gentle as it was, softened, and he let them all in. Abu Sufyan then recited a lengthy poem of the utmost eloquence. As he recited the line,
"A guide other than myself guided me to Allah, a guide whom I repelled at every turn, but he continued to guide me to Allah."
the Prophet struck him on the chest and said, "Yes, by Allah, you repelled me at every turn." The Prophet clearly felt profound pain at his cousin's treatment, and his forgiveness was nothing short of prophetic. The Prophet accepted their Islam, and they both became pious Muslims, serving Islam for the remainder of their lives.